Futures Radio Show, sponsored by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world effectively manage risk. For access to free educational tools and resources for the active individual trader, please visit activetrader.cmegroup.com.
Every day, traders and investors dive in to tackle the ever-changing markets to find opportunity. Futures Radio Show is your number one source for answers to the questions that all market participants want to ask. Veteran futures trader Anthony Crudele sits down with the most influential leaders and top traders in the industry. Now, here's your host, Anthony Crudele.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in for this episode with Jason Urban. Remember, new shows are posted on Mondays and Thursdays. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review on iTunes. Before I play today's interview for you, I want to give a shout out to the great sponsors of Futures Radio Show: CME Group, Trading Technologies, FTSE Russell, RJO Futures, and Top Step Trader. To learn more about these sponsors and the important things they are doing for futures traders, be sure to click on their logos on futuresradioshow.com. Today I spoke with the CEO of DrawBridge Lending, Jason Urban. We discussed his journey from working at Goldman to DRW and now what he is doing with DrawBridge Lending. He explains how they use Bitcoin futures, regulation of digital assets, thoughts on Bitcoin and Facebook's Libra, and last but not least, blockchain adoption in financial markets. So without further ado, let me take you right to the interview with Jason. Jason, you've worked with Goldman and DRW, and now you're with DrawBridge. Talk to us about what you did with Goldman and DRW and what you're currently doing with DrawBridge.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. My history has been on the volatility trading side. So I started off in the business with Goldman, with a little known division at the time, Hull Trading, known well here in Chicago and in the futures markets, and kind of grew up in the business with that mentality of risk management and arbitrage. I was fortunate enough to succeed there and ultimately ended up running the flow side of that trade, where you had the prop, the large franchise business, and then kind of the flow, which was everything that was left over, as well as what was being traded in the pits and on the screens, primarily out of Chicago. Had a good time doing that. It was a great business, and so much so that in 2009, myself and a few of my colleagues left to go and start the same business over at DRW with Don Wilson, because he was one of the few operations that could give us the size and the scope, but was also not a TARP bank that we had to worry about our future earnings and what was going to happen, with the next phase if the other shoe ever dropped during the financial crisis of '08. And was there for another 10 years. During my time there, I not only traded option volatility, but also had the good fortune, or sometimes misfortune, of doing some other interesting things, including running a large herd of cattle, a pig farm, some things that maybe I probably shouldn't have been doing, but were part of the operation. So always kind of trying to take an entrepreneurial bent to things and trying to find different ways to extract information from the marketplace that you could deploy in a trading capacity. So that was my last 20 years. The next year and a half has been here at DrawBridge. I left to start with a group of close friends and partners, and we kind of wanted to take some of the same skills from trading and risk management, compliance, and bring them over into this new digital asset space. And we felt that the lending arena offered the best opportunity. I know that I'm not going to compete with the big black boxes on a trading front and some of the other things, but lending kind of seemed wide open. And so that was why we chose to go down this avenue.
What's interesting to me is that you go from working with Goldman and DRW to huge names to working with DrawBridge and digital assets. I'm just curious why this is the route that you felt was best for you.
Well, I made a mistake very early in my career, and I said this whole internet thing, who's going to buy their clothes online? And people want to try their shoes on or their shirt, and here we are, look at Amazon taking over the world. And I swore to myself I was never going to have that same closed-minded view, as obviously that played out. And when I saw the opportunity in this space, I said, this is something that's going to revolutionize. It's a very disruptive technology, and it is going to change the way business is done, especially our business, the capital markets are going to change, and it's going to be implemented here. And I'd like to be a part of doing that, taking some of the skills that I've learned in the previous 20 years at two awesome institutions and deploying them here in this new asset class.
I love it. You have a vision. You see big things happening in this space.
I think that this is such a disruptive technology that people can't ignore it. And I think it's so much more than the headlines that we see from a traditional perspective. Oh, Bitcoin is used for this, or digital assets, or that. I really think that this is going to impact how businesses are done. I mean, you can see it now in supply chain, but I think that really the way money moves and the way people transact will change. And I don't think that story is completely written. I think it's ever evolving. So what we've done to date isn't necessarily what the future is going to be, but that's a topic for another part of the interview, perhaps.
Yeah, let's focus on some of the things that you guys are doing at DrawBridge. I know lending, trading, custody. Talk to us about that.
So what we're doing is we're a secured lender, and we also do coin lend. We have three main silos. We have fiat lending, where someone who has digital assets but doesn't want to relinquish control can come get a loan from us. We have coin lending, where professional traders who want to borrow coin to transact on exchanges for settlement purposes can come. And then we have an investment product that we offer to people who would like to invest in Bitcoin but don't really know how. And we deploy some of those risk management and yield producing strategies that we do in the other two buckets for a client who wants to come in and get a yield on their Bitcoin or whatever asset it happens to be. And so what we're doing is we're effectively taking tried and true methods from financial markets, from derivatives markets, and applying them in this new space where financial sophistication hasn't caught up with technological sophistication. And we're trying to be on the front edge of that, where we can bring in some of these old, they may seem basic to you and I in terms of saying, hey, we're going to buy a put to hedge some of your exposure. We do things like that one, make lenders coming into the space feel comfortable, and two, people who are transacting in the space do it in a little more responsible and risk-centric way. And that's kind of our thought process in this.
Talk to us about how you use futures, Bitcoin futures, in your business.
Absolutely. So we're risk mitigators in terms of our loans and what we do. So we need to match our futures exposure to our actual coin exposure. And just as exciting, with the CME potentially rolling out options here, hopefully in the next 6 months or so, we use a lot of that in how we structure some of our products. And so we find that using the traditional venues that we're comfortable with from 20 plus years in the business, that we want that to become commonplace in this new industry. And it's exciting to see, groups out there doing that right now.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about regulation, because on the future side of things, it's very cut and dry. We have the NFA, we have the CFTC. We know the rules, and that's it. Now, on the digital asset side, I just get confused. I think most people get confused. Is there regulation? Is there not regulation? So talk to us about what you are dealing with in terms of regulations.
It's really a murky place. And what I mean by that is, you look at DrawBridge. We're a non-bank lender in 49 states, regulated by state authorities. We're also a CTA and a CPO regulated by the CFTC. Myself, as well as a few of my partners, have our Series 7, 24, et cetera. So there's a lot of there's a regulatory alphabet soup that kind of sticks their head in at any given point. And I think that has slowed adoption here in the States, where I think there's more clarity in other jurisdictions. Here, we're still trying to figure out where does the ball have to land? Is it a CFTC product? Is it an SEC product? And I think that slows adoption. I've had calls with some of the larger traditional financial institutions where they've said, hey, we really believe that we want to be in this space. This is the future. We just don't know how to, because if you're a big bulge bracket bank, you really can't afford to take that headline risk of all of a sudden, hey, I was lending money on Bitcoin or whatever the case may be. I was transacting in it and I got a big fine from a regulator. And now am I money laundering? Am I not? What's the stigma attached to that? And I think that from a regulatory perspective, obviously Bitcoin is fairly delineated. Everyone knows the CFTC has claimed that, the SEC hasn't. Security tokens, ICOs, whatever the flavor of the month is in terms of what they're called, there really isn't a defined structure yet. And I think we really need one. And it would be great to have some of these regulatory authorities come down and say, this is exactly what we need to do, or at least some guidance as to what we think we should do.
You've worked in financial markets for more than 20 years. Like we said, you worked with Goldman, DRW, and so you understand financial markets very well. So what I'm curious about is, what do you see as the potential for blockchain adoption in traditional trading and financial markets?
Well, I think that that's probably the easiest jump is to implement blockchain here. Some of the things, whether it's smart contracts or a decentralized ledger, to speed up processes, to take processes like back office and clearing type operations that are very human capital intensive, even as they modernize their techniques. Blockchain would drastically limit how much they have to expend there and what the slippage and the errors are. I think that that's your first step. I think the next step is you're going to see all assets that weren't normally available to the average person become digitized in some capacity, where there's benefits and detriments to this. But imagine an office building where, up until now it's large investment funds or REITs that can participate. Now the average person can say, I really like this building on the corner. I'd love to buy a token in that. And I think you're going to see that open up and revolutionize the way the public transacts in financial markets. And I think you're going to see a way that people who weren't traditionally in certain asset classes get there, and that's opportunity. Obviously, from a trading capacity, when you have people with different levels of information in an asset class, there's always opportunity. But it also, in the long run, is better because it creates a deeper, more liquid base for people to invest in certain things.
Can you give us one thing when you look at financial markets that you would say tomorrow that blockchain would make financial markets operate better?
I mean, I would think that from the clearing perspective, it would really drastically change how people transact and clear. So whether you want to call that the exchange level and or the clearing level, or at least how those two parties interact with each other, I think that's your first step in terms of what happens. Instead of some of these antiquated systems where people are still hand punching and doing things like that, now all of a sudden you put something on the blockchain and everyone in that ecosystem that needs to see it at any given point will be able to. And so from, cross-bank transactions, cross-exchange transactions, I think things will have greater clarity. It'll be able to move quicker with greater certainty. And I think that would be the easiest, lowest hanging fruit as I sit here and look at what does the world become. I think what you're seeing some exchanges try to do that right now. I think you're seeing some exchanges who are just trying to get into the space from hey, I'd like to have a Bitcoin future. But in terms of like the actual plumbing of the system, that's where I see the greatest advantage to the actual blockchain technology.
So you've got your pulse on this. How soon do you think that could possibly happen? Do you think it will happen?
Oh, I think it will happen. I think that the first step is going to be people getting comfortable with it. And who are the thought leaders in our space? Obviously, exchanges are important. Regulators are moving very slow because they're cautious by nature. I'd like to see more exchanges get into it. Obviously, CME has got the future. Cboe had the future. ICE has got BACT. There's different groups that are coming in. As those large players come in, large traditional custodians will come in. You might see, a Boney or a Northern Trust. Obviously, Fidelity's in the space already. These guys aren't coming in because it's not an opportunity and they don't see the future. The business with Libra, I think, was good and bad all at the same time. I think that obviously Libra's got the ability to transform how people interact with money. And I think that also scares people. It scares the big banks. It scares the big credit card companies. And I think that you're going to see more adoption because they're not going to let someone else write the playbook. They're going to want to write it themselves. And that's why I don't think what we currently have seen is the footprint. I think that's going to change the footprint going forward.
I was curious what you thought of Libra. Can you just give us some more of your thoughts on what you think about Libra?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really a boost to the digital currency market. I think that seeing a large player, somebody with multiple billion users, get involved in this is really a boon to the industry. I think the one thing is, and I've said this before, is that Facebook and Zuckerberg have a persona in the public, and however you want to perceive that, there are people who automatically want to fight him no matter what. And I think that creates a little bit of a headwind, and I hope that doesn't hold all of us back as we try to build out this new asset space.
Hey everybody, I want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, FTSE Russell. They are a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. The Russell 2000 Index is a key benchmark for small cap U.S. stocks. Be sure to check out the E-mini Russell 2000 Index Futures, contract symbol RTY. For more information on FTSE Russell and their products, please visit FTSERussell.com. I want to talk a little bit about the price of Bitcoin. Not asking you to predict what you think it will do, but what I want to know is, do you think that the price of Bitcoin or cryptos in general matters for the growth of blockchain or no?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is, and a great fence-sitting question or answer. What I mean by that is I think the price garners attention in the public. Obviously, these assets are divisible, how many decimal points depending on your currency down. So at the end of the day, no, I don't think the price matters from adoption perspective, although it does become more expensive to transact as the price goes higher. But I do think that the price influences what the public sees. And that volatility, as much as for aspects of our business here at DrawBridge, we'd love to see the price at 50,000. I think to be at 50,000 tomorrow would raise more skepticism from traditional users. And while it's great for the small cobble of people that are here now, it isn't great for the market as a whole. So a nice steady growth, I think, is what we all want to see. I think if you're being intellectually honest with yourself, you'd like to see it just gradually move as opposed to some of these violent swings, which gain headlines, but not always the attention you want.
I've asked several people on the show before this question that I'm about to ask you. Do you think that Bitcoin is a commodity, a store of value, a currency, two of the three? What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, what do you consider gold? And I think that's kind of the best way to think about it. Is gold a store of value? Is gold a currency? If Swiss, if the Swiss can, have 10% of it included in their currency, gold, at least they used to. So is gold a currency? Is it a commodity when it's used for connectors and clips inside of a computer? I think that if you sit there and look at what Bitcoin is, I think it's a lot of those things. And if Bitcoin is one thing, some of these other projects or protocols are different because they're built to solve different problems. And so when you think about it, digital assets as a whole, I think are all of the above. but just differently. I mean, the commodity aspect of it might be a little difficult, but it behaves like a commodity. The way the options curve moves, the way the futures curves move, it behaves as though it's a commodity. So it's the old, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I think that Bitcoin kind of falls into that category as well.
We talked about how you spent 20 years in financial markets, and the last 2 years you've spent in the digital asset space. So being in the digital asset space for 2 years now, I'm curious, how much have you seen it change over that period of time, and what you see happening the next 2 years?
It's been quite a ride on the last 2 years. When we first got into the space, I think there were some professionals, there were some people that were hobbyists who believed in this, there were some anarchists, there were a hodgepodge of different people, and any given day you could meet somebody you were really impressed with and somebody you were really frightened of. And so, as time has gone on and people have started to adopt, whether or not the fringe players are still here or not, their voices have been muted and they've been kind of pushed to the side as the adults in the room play together, so to speak. And I think that what you're going to see, that's been the last two, and that changes. The speed of change in this industry is amazing. A lot more so than even the financial markets, where when you think about, electronic trading and, all of a sudden, bam, it's here. But it took, it was here. It took really 7 years to adopt. In Bitcoin, we're seeing things change in 7 months. And so where I see it going in the next two, I think you're going to start to see traditional behemoth institutions get involved, and that's going to change the flavor. I mean, how people interact with each other, what they do, what the regulators say, because those guys are going to have a voice at a regulator, where some guy who may be worth a lot of money because he mined Bitcoin for $1 doesn't necessarily have a voice that resonates in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere. Now, a large institution, whether it's the CME, large banks, large brokerage houses, they're going to have a voice, and that will push regulation, which will push further adoption. So I think you're going to see some rapid evolution in that capacity.
For the mom and pops at home that aren't traders or working in financial markets, do you think that digital assets or blockchain technology have already impacted their lives? And if not, what's one way you think that they will soon see an impact in their lives?
There's two different things. Have digital assets changed their life? I don't know about that. I think that how does blockchain change their lives in ways that they don't even see? Whether it's supply chain things and blockchain being used there. Everybody who's bought a diamond ring, the fact that it wasn't a blood diamond was because they created a blockchain to track where the blood diamonds were. There are things that have impacted their lives to date and that are going to continue to change. I think that, from a cryptocurrency perspective, I think how it will affect their lives is going to be no different than when a credit card came on board. For people who, got their, when you first had credit cards in the, 60s and 70s, that was a new thing. Now everybody's got, 5 or 6 of them. I think that when people start to think about what their digital wallet is going to look like, there's going to be 5 or 6 different currencies used for different things. And maybe it's investment, maybe it's utility, maybe it is buying a cup of coffee. That I don't know. And that's part of the fun of this, is that it is kind of ever changing. And, maybe one of the things that's out there now is the winner. Maybe it's something we've never even heard of. So that's the fun of it. But that's how I think it's going to affect those mom and pops.
Great insight, Jason, but we're not done yet. I have rapid fire questions next if you're ready for those.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Our rapid fire segment is sponsored by Trading Technologies. Trade the global markets with TT, the world's fastest commercially available futures trading platform. Now with integrated tools for advanced options trading, cryptocurrencies, and trade surveillance. You can try it now free at tryttnow.com. Jason, first question for you. What trader has influenced your life the most and why?
I don't think there's any one trader that influences you. I think that you take little bits and pieces from each one, and you take parts that were good from one guy, parts that were good from another, and that makes you have your own style.
What was one of the hardest things for you to overcome in trading?
Learning to look at something through a different set of lenses. We all know the world through our own eyes, but a lot of times the answer is right in front of us, but you have to pull yourself away from the situation and look at it from a different perspective.
How has your trading process evolved over the years?
Oh, I've gone from being risk averse to a risk taker to now more of a risk manager, if you will.
What is one attribute that you believe every trader should have?
The ability to know when you're wrong and be intellectually honest with yourself about it.
Favorite book about trading?
I like the New Market Wizards because there's a lot of, again, different views of different people who have done things.
If you could choose one profession other than being in financial markets and digital assets, what would you do?
From a money perspective, I'd be a lawyer because I know what we pay them right now. From a personal well-being, I'd love to be a coach. I think that there's something special about teaching kids how to make themselves better.
What's the best piece of advice that you received about trading?
Don't fall in love with your position.
If you could go back in time and give the younger you a piece of advice, what would you say?
Buy spoos at 700? No. In all seriousness, I think that to keep an open mind about everything, to listen to everyone's opinions always, because you never know when someone has a different way of looking at things. And if you discount that last guy on the desk, sometimes he might be the smartest guy and no one knows it.
If you had an elevator pitch me your edge in trading, what would you say?
I have the experience that no one else has. I've lived a lot of markets. I've done a lot of things, and I've seen the good, the bad. People make great decisions, and people make terrible decisions.
Last question for today, Jason. What's your favorite thing to do when you're not working?
Oh, I like to play with my kids. I also like to do a little woodworking. Little pickup basketball. I think I'm getting a little long in the tooth for that. So,
where can people find you on social media, preferably Twitter, and give us a website to check out?
Website's DrawBridgeLending.com. Twitter is JUrbanDBL, and my LinkedIn is Jason Urban DrawBridge Lending.
Jason, thank you so much for coming on Futures Radio Show today.
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Futures Radio Show. If you have any questions or comments for myself or my guests, please visit futuresradioshow.com and sign up to be a premium member for free. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes.